Money over that period. The British, I think, were the first to leave the gold standard over that period. The French left, the Americans left, pretty much every country in the world. I think it was like 80 odd countries. So many people defaulted because of the cost of war, right? And that's another typical thing that destroys currency is the cost of warfare. It's the most expensive thing governments ever spend on. It's one of the features of today and why we've got so much debt is the cost of wars that we fought that we could never pay the bills for.
Right.
So, all of the precedents are all there. So then what happens is World War II. And this is where the story really starts. So the collapse of the British Empire leads to World War I, which leads to the rise of Hitler, which leads to World War II. 70 million people die. I mean, it's unprecedented. It's 3.5 times the size of the number of people who died in World War I. And again, that was the shock that brought the next thing, which is the unexpected thing. Those things were kind of expected because, geopolitics, they trend in certain ways. Yes, there was unintended consequences of the shooting of Archduke Ferdinand for World War I, was this fiscal stimulus where they basically, again, imposed financial repression by capping the yield curve control, allowed inflation to run relatively hot. It wasn't super hot, but it was hotter than bond yields to lower the burden of debt. But then they fiscally stimulated in an unprecedented manner never seen before in world history. That stimulus and the Marshall Plan of rebuilding Germany and rebuilding Japan, that stimulus created the boom of the 1950s. And the 1950s and 1960s were probably the last golden age we ever saw, where real wages were rising. People's standard of living was going through the roof as the technology that got developed during warfare turned into consumer goods like washing machines and cars.
Right.
And everybody had access to it. Labor was still relatively inexpensive. So that's what part of where there was the politics of nostalgia. So typically on the on the right of the political spectrum, whether it's the UK or whether it's the US, they look back at the 1950s as the golden era. 1949 was NATO, 1957 was the EU. So these are the super infrastructure of the world that we've all grown up in. This is the centralized power of globalization. And that was put in place to avoid what had happened in the past. So, go on. All of this rules-based global order architecture was built around America and its globalized ambitions. So now you've gone from an empire organizing the complex adaptive society of the British organizing the complex adaptive society of empire to the Americans organizing the global complex adaptive society using this rules-based global order system. And because it's pretty non-threatening, yes, America had military might and exercised it firstly in the Suez, then in Korea, then in Vietnam, and ongoing as America's done, because it is the superpower and that's kind of its job, rightly or wrongly, or deemed to be its job. That's what sets it up. So the US is now the epicenter of the system and controls the rules. And that's fine. That works pretty well. So meanwhile, let's go back to these baby boomers. 1967, the first of them start entering the workforce. So they just, hit their 20s and they start entering the workforce. America can't deal with running twin deficits and being pegged to gold. It's losing its gold supplies. Its currency's too strong. And in 1971, Nixon walks away from the whole thing. And we go to the fiat money system because it's unmanageable with this population boom going on and the rising inflation and all of the other pressures that are going on. By 1986, the baby boomers enter the workforce. The last baby boomer enters the workforce. Mm-hmm. So you've got this period, which we refer to as the Great Inflation, which most people think of as being a monetary phenomena. I think is a demographic phenomenon. I can prove it in every chart that I look at, proves that it was demographics.
Right.
The monetary side, of course, played a role. But the reality was, if you were to put the same setup anywhere in the world, regardless of what you're pegged against, you've got the same demand shock.
Right.
And the world can't keep up. Right now, as we're talking, we've got a supply shock. So, the demand has risen to normal levels. That was the dream of the 50s.
Yeah.
They saw their parents have that. And the baby boomers never got any of it. They got something entirely different. Suddenly, they got this weird world where fiat currency was being gradually debased, not like we have these days, but gradually debased by inflation, money supply issues, stuff like that. And asset prices start to rise. And their wages don't. Mm-hmm. And this is the key thing, is if your assets rise and your wages don't, your future self is poorer. Mm-hmm. Because an asset is a way of storing wealth for future consumption. Mm. But within this is an uglier picture as well, is the fact that if you split the population down between with kind of percentiles, the lower percentiles saw zero increase in wages, complete zero, because they've been left behind.
Right.
And nobody knows why, so they blame it on politics. But the reality is it's people having too many kids.
Right.
So they are really angry because both those parties have this base of the poor, but in different parts of the country. And those guys' lives never improved. They were promised a dream that never happened. They live in the world's richest nation, and they never got any of it.
Right.
And then all they're bombarded with is the imagery of the beautiful rich getting richer and how great America is. And they're like, well, what happened to us? Of course you're going to cause populism. Yeah. And we'll get into that towards the end when we're trying to figure out between the two of us, how can we solve some of this? Because it's going to require not doing things that we've done in the past. Things that feel crazy or wrong to us are going to have to be tried and tested, because we cannot simply keep flipping from, well, we're going to support people in certain ways on the left, or we're going to hope we can get rich people to trickle down their wealth to poor people. I mean, we've done the same fucking thing now for 40 years, and it doesn't work. Right? These people's wages have never gone up. Their standard of living has not gone up.